Welcome to Not in My Estate with me, National Call. In this episode, we want to talk about the government affordable housing agenda. We want to look at it whether it will work. The Ruto administration has talked about doing 250,000 houses annually. 250,000 houses annually, and I want to look at it. Just disabuse it. Dissect it, analyze it, and see whether it is feasible. And that we look at what the previous administration agenda. How did that go? And look at some countries in Africa: Ethiopia, Angola, Ghana have been doing affordable housing. How is that going? And compare it to what we're trying to do. That's all that we want to do in this episode. Talk about affordable housing agenda. And look at it in terms of success, whether it will succeed, what are the cons, what are the pros, what challenges they're going to face, and see whether this agenda that is so elusive for many countries, many administrations. Housing is a big issue in developing countries. It's a big problem. Today we're talking about the UN estimate that about 40,000 people move to cities on a daily basis. 40,000 people. Like when the sun in the morning and set in the evening, about 40K have moved to cities. Yeah? It's a big issue. The rapid rise of urbanization. And remember, we have one of the highest urbanization rate in Africa. 4.4%. One of the highest in the continent. We have so many people moving to urban centers in Kenya than most countries in Africa. Add to our population growth rate. We have what we call a Molotov cocktail on our hands very soon. So housing is at the center of it. If you look at what is happening in Pakistan, Indonesia, and India, those models on housing and the crisis on housing, there's a lot to learn from. So first of all, I want to say it's a good thing, and for the second administration running, that we have the government attention on housing. That's fantastic. I think that's commendable. Uhuru started it, and Ruto has begun with that as well. That's a good step. That the government is thinking about housing, and rightfully so. Looking at what I've talked about, urbanization rate and our population growth rate are so rapid that this is something we must have a discussion on. So I want to look at it in terms of its success. And I'll be brutally honest with it to see whether my key area is to whether it will succeed. And I'll try and look at it both ways. I don't want to be negative. I'll stay positive, but look at the facts that are before us. Now, housing, if you look at Article 43 1B of our Constitution, the right to housing is there. Article 43 1B, every person has a right to accessible and adequate housing. That's our Constitution. So this is a right from the beginning. Housing is a right. This is something that every Kenyan has a right to. And they say the right to accessible and adequate. And in fact, it says, and to reasonable standard of sanitation. Reasonable standard of sanitation. So this is a right. All of us has this right. Every Kenyan citizen born and bred in this country or otherwise, as long as the citizens, they have a right to this housing. But before I talk about this program, this agenda for this administration, I want to look at Uhuru's agenda on housing. And I wrote so many articles on this since 2017. So many articles I wrote on every weekend in the Standard about that agenda. From the word go, I had issues with it. And I'll tell you the issues that I had with it, and probably the issues that I've translated in this administration, the same issues that I have. Now, 2017 Jubilee administration, housing was one of the big five. The big four agendas, not big five, big four agendas. And the agenda was to do 500,000 houses in a year. 500,000 houses in a year. Sounds good. But remember, actually, that target, if you study the Kibaki administration medium-term plan 1 of 2009, that one was quite ambitious than this one. And MTP, the medium-term plan 1 of 2009, of the Kibaki administration was aligned to Vision 2030. One of the issues I had with the Jubilee housing agenda was it took us off Vision 2030 goal. MTP plus, Plan 1 was aligned to Vision. It was more ambitious than this one. First of all, it is my outright belief that it's not the business of government to do houses. It's my thought. I don't think it's the business of any government to do houses. It is not. And in my view, government should provide enabling environment to do houses. Government is so limited in developing countries. We don't have money that it cannot be focused on doing housing. It needs to give the environment and proper environment for housing, policies to in place, and then people do houses. That's my view, all right? But let's look at the statistics of our housing. So we have about 250 housing demand in a year. I personally think it's more than that because we've thrown this figure for almost a decade since Jubilee administration, 250. I think it's worse than 250. Honestly, it is worse than 250. Considering the growth in our country, the population growth, I do not think we are at 250,000 anymore. We abandoned this 250 number for over a decade actually, without increasing even to 251,000. It's not 250, but for heaven's sake, argument's sake, let's have 250. So we have a demand of 250,000 against a supply of about 50,000. So usually we have a deficit of around 200,000 houses in a year. As I said, I think it's way more than 200,000. We have a much bigger deficit and demand than being portrayed. But the other statistics we have about 60% of Kenyans only own houses, only 60%, and I think about 2% are on mortgage. So those are the realms where we operate from. So you realize a big part of Kenyans rent. And that's why sometimes when people, let me deviate a bit, when people talk about the bubble, housing bubble, I was like, guys, do you know what I'm talking about? Those are what I call pseudo analysts who don't understand real estate. What bubble are you talking about when not even a quarter of Kenyans own houses? There's a big part of Kenyans that don't own houses. You can't talk of a bubble because the high-end market is full. Yeah, and some people don't want to think about the products for low-end. They talk about bubble. There's no bubble. We have still a big market for housing in this country. Now, the previous administration targeted 500,000 houses. And as I said, it's a good thing. Government's first time focused on housing. But there were certain things that they didn't do right. And I believe those were the major issues. I honestly don't think that a meaningful debate on affordable housing can be done in this country without looking at the cost of construction. I honestly don't think so. And I wrote about it when the Jubilee agenda of housing started. Our construction cost is quite high. Even if you wanted to do that affordable housing, the cost of construction is quite high. The cost of land is ridiculous in this town. And I've realized that it's growing even in very little towns in this country. Land is becoming extremely expensive. And yet land and construction cost are the key components that contribute to the sale price of a house. Those are the two substantial ones. Now, the People's Administration began that debate on housing without looking at cost of construction. They just threw it away like it will somehow work. That with the high construction cost, somehow it will work. It didn't. And then they attempted to remove some levies like NEMA levy and NCA levy, very insignificant levies that can't even change the cost of a house. And here we are. If you check certain countries like Ethiopia, where land is in fact state-owned, land in Ethiopia is state-owned. So their housing agenda, which is one of the most ambitious in any developing country, the Ethiopia housing agenda since 2006, but they face these challenges of cost of construction. And when we began in 2017, I asked, why can't we study Ethiopia, for example? Because 10 years from 2017, 2006, they were already doing housing, social housing, for example. And it failed. debate on housing, on affordable housing must also begin with, we look at the cost of construction. It is high. It's high not only in Kenya, it's high in Africa. And it's something we must look at as a people. All right? That was not looked at. Then there is the financialization of housing. Yeah? These are the policies and practices that promote the perception of housing as an investment area. You know, Article 43(1)(b) is talking about housing as a right. And when I talk about the current administration agenda, I'll talk about housing as a right. Housing and not ownership, because that's a problem we have again in this country. It's a big problem we have. We are fixated in ownership. But part of the reasons why Jubilee's housing agenda failed is not that because it was too ambitious. There was no plan to reduce the cost of construction. Yeah. In my view, there were no clear policies and incentives that will allow developers, private, as much as possible to get involved. I think that it's imperative that you allow policies. I still believe, and I want to prove otherwise, I still believe it's not the business of government to provide housing, to build houses. Environment can create it, especially in these developing countries. And sometimes when you say that the government honchos throw about the issue, but what about Singapore? What about Singapore? They throw that all the time. What about Singapore? And yet, Singapore model of housing, if you look at it, is unique, is sui generis. It's never been replicated in any other country globally. And we will not replicate it. Because, I mean, just look at one of the key components of Singapore model of housing, that even here, governments start throwing around, oh, Singapore does it, why not us? Their model of housing, in fact, integrate the social, the different social aspects of society. The haves and the have-nots get integrated together. We don't do it here. We want to build affordable housing and get people from Kibera to that affordable housing. I mean, we are creating ghettos, high-rise ghettos in the first place. The key issue why Jubilee government failed in housing is because the housing price was not dealt with. The cost of construction was dealt with, the cost of construction. People are doing housing for profits. And that's something we don't talk about. I'll talk about it later, but housing for profit as well. And in capitalism of willing buyer, willing seller, we will not meet the housing deficit with that in mind. It cannot be on willing buyer, willing seller. It's a big problem. But the cost of construction is a big issue. The land cost is a big issue. And I know sometimes we've tried to, like government donation of land. Yeah, it's so the country gives lands, people build. But still, if the cost of construction is high, and look, it will not matter who you give the supply of windows. It doesn't matter whether you give it to a local guy or a foreign guy. The steel price is still the same in this local market. So it doesn't matter who you're going to build you're going to give to build doors. If timber prices are high, it's high for everyone. So we need to review that cost of construction for us to start talking about affordability. That's a problem. And unfortunately, this administration has begun on that same wrong footnote. Our cost of cement, of steel, of everything is high until we discuss those elements. And actually, construction industry is one of the greatly taxed industries. And this year, we've even we've tripled the capital gain tax. The capital gain tax is tripled. It will affect construction and real estate industry, definitely. So we are adding more cost and talk about affordability. How will that happen? All right? Environment that allows the cost of construction to be affordable for anyone, so that any single person can build affordable housing. That's a good environment. And in view of our limited resources as a country, government does not have enough money to build houses. Give us the environment with affordability of construction costs, so that people begin to build at the private level affordable houses. Even this administration has not started doing that. That's a problem. Yeah? And trust me, and I will not quote it, The previous administration failed miserably on housing. Miserably on housing. I think one time I had the former government spokesperson, Kara Laguna, talk about who built 250,000. Where? It's not there. It did work. That's the truth. And we must dissect the truth of why it didn't work, so that we can learn. And as this administration begin work, they must get it right. All right? Financialization of housing is a problem for the previous administration. We must treat housing as a right. This is a right, not an investment area where people make profit. If government is to achieve housing for its people, it must be an agenda focused not on profits. It must be agenda focused on achieving a constitutional right for people. It almost has to be non-profit. That's the level we have to get to. Number two, it has to be housing, not ownership. I don't understand why government is so conflated with ownership. People conflate housing to ownership. And a lot of government institutions, a lot of government leaders, a lot of our leaders here, a lot of the content leaders conflate the right to housing to the right to ownership. People want houses. People don't want to own houses. People want decent houses. They don't have to own them. They don't have to own them. All right? And if you look at Article 1B, it is the right to housing. In fact, the article is very clear. Every person has a right to accessible and adequate housing, not ownership. It's housing. So I don't know why we are so fixated with this issue of home ownership. We want people to own. People who are owning houses, pay 5,000 so that you own. It's not a must. I mean, look at the Nordic countries. Long-term rents is one of the strategies that the Nordics have used so much. The Nordics of Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Iceland. Look at those countries. Switzerland. A lot of those strategies for those, and they've achieved it at a high level. It's on rental, it's on long-term rents. What can we think about long-term rents? What is this issue that we must pay rent to own? Why can't we just pay 15 years of rent or 30 years of rent? Why can't we give people houses and rent for 30 years? What's the problem? Decent housing, why must we put it as ownership? The right to housing is not the right to ownership. People want housing. The Constitution is clear on housing, not ownership. And we should not conflate the right to housing to the right to ownership. It is housing and not ownership. People want houses. And if you look at it on the flip side, all right, our issue in this country is not even a supply issue. In my view, the housing issue is not a supply issue. It's a demand issue. It's a demand issue. If you look at housing, I mean, how many people live on less than $1 a day in this country? Are you going to tell them to own houses? Housing is the least. Owning a house is the least on their bucket list. It's the least down there. They are not interested in owning houses. They're interested in having a decent house. So this administration must move away from the previous mistake of ownership. Move away from it. Give people decent housing. You can give them on 15 years or 20 years rents. It's working in the Nordics, a very good example. They do not have to own houses. It's not a must people own houses. Give them long-term rents, long-term leases. Someone earning less than $1 a day is not interested in owning a house. They just want a decent house to live in. Right? That's one thing we need to do. Then remove the financialization of housing. I think that for me is a key thing. It's one of the things that will allow us to address the cost of construction. We must remove the financialization of housing. All right? These policies and practices that have promoted the perception of housing as an investment area. I mean, that's for me is a problem. We've created some policies and practices that have converted this right to an investment product where people make profit. And you cannot, I don't think you can able to achieve housing in the same environment as an investment area of making profit. And achieve it in this our environment of capitalism, of willing buyer, willing seller, it will be a problem. If you look at a number of countries have gone even the issue of giving housing at that, treating the agenda as a non-profit agenda. Let people put targets on that profit. Say for this housing project you'll make only 5% profit. Yeah, that's a good idea that we can start from, and then discuss on this cost of construction. And one of the ideas that I've always said, talk to manufacturers. I expected the government to have this discussion with the manufacturers. Talk to the cement guys. How much is cement? 680. Ask them what will it cost them to bring it at 300. Can you reduce some of those taxes? Go to steel, go to mabati, go to whatever it is. Then open after negotiating with the manufacturers on this, open for anyone to apply to build on that program. And just get away from it as government. I mean, it's very much doable. It's something we can do as a people. Then you will have 100,000 people building affordable housing at the same time. You will achieve your 250. You will achieve it. Negotiate with manufacturers. Get those cement prices at 300, steel at good prices. All those products, get them at good prices. Then open a program that national can apply to build 100 units within that program. And then put limits on profit, that the profit on this program, you'll only make 5% profit. But don't open it that I can still make my 15%, 20% annualized returns and still want to achieve affordable housing. It's not possible. We must change the environment to achieve this housing. Those are the things we must discuss. And until we discuss that, 250,000 annualized annual target, look, it's achievable. I said 500,000 is achievable, and I still believe so. 250 is achievable. But the environment that the government is operating to achieve this housing agenda is wrong. First of all, it should not be a target on ownership. To achieve 250,000 times 5, yeah, it's almost 1.2 million, 1.25. 1,250,000 houses in 5 years. That if you're going to achieve this, it must be within the model that I've talked about. It cannot be the model of making big returns. Financialization of housing. It can't be that model. It must be a model that discusses the cost of construction. That has to be discussed. That has to be a top priority discussion. We must lower the cost of construction for us to achieve this agenda. Number two, we must limit the profits. It can't be this capitalism market where everyone goes out to achieve the profits they want. Because we must accept that government has no resources to do these houses. So the private sector must step in. And for me, open it to every Tom. Have a model that opens to every Tom, Dick, and Harry who can build to build. Because whether you have 10 people with big mansions, they will not be able to achieve 1,250,000 houses in a year. It won't be possible. Develop a model that allows for 100,000 people to build at the same time. Convert your discussion from ownership to housing. People want housing. As I've said, the problem that we have as well in this housing market is that it is a demand issue, not a supply issue. If you go to the base of our country, down there, housing is a demand issue, not a supply issue. People do not have the capacity to purchase houses, even if we provided. So the long-term rents like the Nordics do is fantastic. We don't have to give people houses to own. They can be on long-term rents. So honestly, as the way this model has begun is the same model as Jubilee administration. I don't see any difference. I'm hoping maybe, we are, how many months? Almost 6 months is going. we should have done almost 125,000 houses already. 6 years of this administration is running out. 6 months, So let's have the policies in place, and until we discuss, as I said, cost of construction, change housing, change the agenda to housing, not ownership. Remove the financialization of housing. The policies and practices that have made this as an investment product. This is a right. Treat housing as a right, Article 43(1)(b, that right. So remove the huge profits in it. Create a model that allows as many Tom, Dicks, and Harry to get on board and build houses. Don't leave it to a few clicks. You will not succeed. If the government does not change onto these platforms, they will not succeed. That is the truth. And hopefully, it's sad to say that, but that's the truth. I want our government to succeed on this agenda, because the high urbanization rate we are experiencing, and it's going to get worse. Our population is growing as well at a high rate. If we don't get a structure of housing, we're going to be in serious problems in the near future. This is a Molotov. This is a Molotov cocktail. This is a keg gas, a keg powder in our hands. We must deal with it appropriately as a people. And in my view, the pedestal which the government has started this administration on this agenda, in my view, is wrong. They will not get it. Just like the Hood administration will not get it. You cannot achieve housing with this mainstream thinking. It must be an out-of-the-box thinking. This mainstream thinking, 5 years did very little. And sometimes I have said, the problem is not even whether they'll build. And I said that in the previous mission. The issue is not even whether they build. The issue is whether they will build affordable. Because, I talked about, I mentioned Angola. Yeah? There's the ghost city of Angola. I mean, you can Google it. A lot of houses that were built by the government for affordable housing completed is a ghost city. People can't afford. So we just don't want you to build houses. We want you to build houses that is affordable, that people can rent on long term. And those who can buy at affordable rates. And you will not do that when the cost of construction is still high the way it is, and you are still increasing certain taxes in that environment. How are we going to achieve it? If you do not change on this pedestal, I do not see a success on affordable housing agenda. Sorry. Thank you very much.